Don't fall for these 7 common tomato myths this growing season. First, they're not root hairs. These are called trichomes, and while they look like little root hairs, they're not, but they serve a great purpose for the health of your tomato plant. First, they serve as pest control. It's a great natural way for your tomato plant to repel pests and keep them from being able to climb along the stems. Next, it's great for temperature fluctuations. It helps regulate the temperature of your plant throughout the entire growing season. It's also really beneficial with respect to moisture retention, which is super important in the life cycle of a tomato plant. And finally, trichomes contain essential oils that they excrete, and it gives the tomato its unique scent. It also helps to attract beneficial pollinators to your plants. Now, one of the things that we're commonly told when it comes to growing tomatoes is that you have to plant them super deeply. Now, this is a myth for a couple of reasons. One, it's because a lot of people think that the trichomes are actually root hairs. So they'll tell you that as deeply as you can plant your tomato plants, anywhere that these little trichomes are hitting the soil, they're going to grow into roots, and that's going to help the root structure of your plant. But that's not true. We already discussed that trichomes are not roots. There are roots that will emerge from the stem on the tomato plant. These are called adventitious roots, but those have nothing to do with the trichomes. Now, planting your tomato plants deeply will help coax some of these adventitious roots out of the stem. And yes, they will grow some roots into the soil where they otherwise wouldn't have grown. But planting your tomatoes as deeply as possible is not always great, because tomatoes are very temperature sensitive, and the deeper you go in the soil, the cooler it's going to get. And because tomatoes are a warm weather crop and you grow them in the summer, you definitely don't want their roots to be too cold. That's going to inhibit growth, and it's not going to give you the yield that you're looking for. Now, there are a lot of resources out there that'll tell you that the best way to grow tomato plants to ensure that they thrive is to space them between 3 and 4 feet apart. I'm here to tell you that that is absolutely not necessary. If you practice vertical gardening, you can grow your tomatoes very closely together, about 12 to 18 inches, which opens up tons more real estate for more plants and more tomatoes. Another thing you'll hear about all the time when seeking out tomato wisdom is suckers. And suckers are the enemy, and you should be pruning them. This is a sucker. This right here, if left to its own devices, will become its own main stem of a tomato plant. With indeterminate tomato varieties, the main stem will continue to grow all the way throughout the season until it's killed off by first frost. The same is true for the suckers. These guys will turn into their own main stem, and they will grow their own tomato plant, and they will grow suckers on their stems as well, and those will continue to grow indeterminately throughout the entire season until it gets too cold for the plant. Now, one of the things you'll commonly hear is that you should always pinch off the suckers on your tomato plants in order to redirect the energy to the main stem and help your main stem grow fruit. Now, that can be true depending on the way that you're growing your tomatoes, but it's not always true. If you left the tomato to its own devices, it'll grow as big as it can possibly grow, and each of these stems is going to continue to grow fruit. The growth on those stems isn't going to be overly impacted by the growth on the other stems of the tomato. Really, one of the best reasons for you to consider pinching the suckers off of your tomato plants is if you want to grow in a more compact environment. So if you have indeterminate tomatoes and you know that your main stem is going to just continue growing throughout the entire season, you can confidently pinch off the suckers and know that your plant will continue to grow and will continue to bear fruit. If you want to practice vertical gardening, so you need closer quarters, or square foot gardening for the same reason, then absolutely consider pinching off the suckers. But it's not necessary. You don't have to do it. And in fact, if you're growing determinate varieties of tomatoes, it's actually a really bad move, because eventually with a determinate tomato, your main stem is gonna stop bearing fruit. But if you let the suckers continue to grow, they will grow into their own main stem. They will give you more fruit on your determinate tomato varieties. Another piece of advice you might hear when it comes to growing tomatoes is that in order to enhance the sweetness of your tomatoes' fruit, you should be adding either baking soda or sugar to the soil that you're growing your tomatoes in. Now, we understand the intention behind that advice, but it's not good advice. Adding baking soda to your soil might help make it a little bit more alkaline, but it's not going to lessen the acidity of your tomatoes' fruit. In the same way that adding sugar to your soil isn't going to cause your tomato plant's roots to soak up the sugar, bring it up through the stem, and deliver it to the fruits, thereby making the fruits that much sweeter. It just doesn't work that way. If you want sweeter tomatoes, then buy a sweeter tomato variety. There are hundreds of varieties of tomatoes available on the market. Do some research, find the ones that get the reviews for sweetest tomato, and get those and grow them in your garden. And speaking of differences in tomato flavors and varieties, there's a common misconception out there that if you grow two separate varieties too closely to each other, they're going to cross-pollinate and they're going to interbreed, and it's actually going to impact the fruit that you harvest that season. That's simply not true. Now, of course, cross-pollination does happen, but when it happens, it impacts the seeds that are in the tomatoes. It doesn't impact the fruit for this year's harvest. So you can be confident that the fruit that you harvest from the varieties that you're growing are true to that variety. But if you are planning on saving your seeds for next year, it is good practice to separate your plants a little bit. It doesn't have to be too crazy. Probably something between 30 and 50 feet should suffice. And the final myth that you should absolutely ignore when it comes to growing your tomatoes this season is that you should wait until your tomatoes are fully ripened before you harvest them off of the vine. That's absolutely not true, and it actually has a lot of drawbacks if you do that. First, it invites pests. One of the things that you can do if you pick a tomato before it's fully ripened is you're limiting the amount of time it's on the vine and the amount of time that it's available to other pests. So you're going to limit the battling that you're going to have to do for other creatures that want your tomatoes before you get a chance to get to them. Also, unlike some things like squash, tomatoes continue to ripen even after they're picked. You can harvest fully green tomatoes and bring them inside, put them on the counter, or put them into a paper bag, and they will continue to ripen, and they'll be just as delicious as they would have been had you allowed them to ripen fully on the vine, with the added benefit of not having to fight with pests. I hope this was helpful information for you as you grow your tomatoes this season. Sometimes we gardeners get super passionate and tend to overcomplicate things. Tomatoes are not difficult to grow. Find a good spot with a lot of sun, give them the right food, give them some water, and you will have a brilliant harvest this season. Happy growing.